You're just here because she pays the bills, right? Daniel's voice cut through the laughter, sharp and casual, like it was the most natural thing in the world, and the worst part wasn't what he said, it was the way Olivia laughed with him, not a polite laugh, not an awkward one, but a real one, the kind she used to save for me, and for a second, the room felt smaller, tighter, like all the oxygen had been replaced with something heavier. I didn't react, not the way they expected. I didn't snap, didn't defend myself, I just took a slow sip of my drink and let the moment settle, because moments like that matter, they mark the exact second everything shifts, and I remember thinking, clear as day, this is where it ends, not the marriage, not yet, but the illusion. The ballroom shimmered under gold chandeliers, glasses clinked, conversations layered over each other, and nobody noticed the quiet line being drawn right in the middle of that polished floor, nobody except me. My name is Ethan Cole, 38 years old, and if you asked anyone in that room, they'd tell you I was Olivia Cole's husband, the guy who showed up to events in a tailored suit but didn't seem to have a title worth mentioning, the one who stood half a step behind her while she owned the spotlight, and for years, I let that story exist, I let it grow, because sometimes the strongest position is the one no one sees. Olivia stood there in a dark green dress, confident, radiant, completely at home among executives and decision-makers, her hand resting lightly on Daniel's arm like it belonged there, like I didn't exist at all, and maybe to her, I didn't, not anymore. People assume betrayal is loud, explosive, something you can point to, but it's not, it's quiet, subtle, built from 100 small moments where respect disappears one piece at a time, and by the time you notice it, the damage is already done. Daniel leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough to sound personal but loud enough for others to hear, asking what I actually did all day, and the circle tightened, waiting, curious, entertained, and I could feel Olivia watching me, not to support me, not to step in, but to see how I'd handle it, like this was some kind of test. I met his eyes, held them for a second longer than necessary, and smiled, not wide, not force, just enough to make him pause, because confidence without explanation unsettles people, and I'd learned that a long time ago. The truth was, they didn't know me, not really, not the version of me that existed outside this room. Outside this carefully constructed narrative where I was just the husband, just the background, just the man they could laugh at without consequence, and Olivia, she believed it too, maybe more than anyone else, maybe because she needed to, because the moment she questioned it, everything she thought she understood would start to fall apart. I set my glass down, adjusted my cuff like it actually mattered, and let the noise return around me, because I wasn't here to argue. I wasn't here to correct them, I was here to watch, to listen, to confirm something I had been feeling for months but hadn't fully acknowledged until now. Betrayal doesn't always come with a confession, sometimes it shows up in a laugh, in a look, in the way someone chooses not to stand beside you when it counts, and standing there, surrounded by people who thought they understood the entire story, I realized something simple and absolute. Olivia didn't just underestimate me, she had completely rewritten who I was in her mind, and that kind of mistake doesn't end quietly. It ends with everything collapsing at once, they just didn't know it yet, and neither did she. I did not stay long after that exchange, not because I was uncomfortable, but because I had already seen everything I needed to see, and once you see the truth clearly, there is no reason to linger in the illusion. Olivia barely noticed when I stepped away from the group, her attention already drifting back to Daniel, to the conversation, to the world where I no longer fit. And that told me more than anything she could have said out loud. I moved through the crowd slowly, past polished tables and quiet conversations, until the noise softened behind me and the hallway opened into something quieter, colder, more honest. I pulled out my phone, not to check messages, but to confirm access, a habit I had built over years, systems layered beneath systems, structures that did not rely on appearances or opinions, and within seconds, everything was exactly where it should be, accounts, permissions, oversight, all still firmly in place. People think power looks loud, visible, obvious, but real control is quiet, it sits in the background, untouched, unquestioned, until the moment it chooses to surface. I leaned against the wall for a second, letting the silence settle. replaying her laugh in my head, not because it hurt, but because it clarified something I had been avoiding, something I had been too patient to confront. This was not a misunderstanding, not a rough patch, not something that could be fixed with effort or time. This was a shift in how she saw me, and once respect is gone, everything else is just performance. My phone buzzed once. A notification from an internal system most people did not even know existed, and I watched the data update in real time, clean, precise, unquestionable, a quiet reminder of the reality that existed beyond that ballroom. Upstairs, decisions were being made, numbers were moving, authority was being exercised, and none of it required me to raise my voice or prove anything to anyone in that room. I straightened my jacket, glanced back toward the doors where the laughter still echoed faintly, and for the first time that night, I felt something close to certainty, not anger, not regret, just clarity, the kind that comes when the last piece finally falls into place, because the truth was simple. Olivia had already made her choice long before tonight, she just did not realize what that choice was going to cost her. By the time I stepped back into the ballroom, nothing had changed on the surface, the same laughter, the same polished conversations, the same illusion of control, but once you see the structure behind it, you cannot unsee it, and every smile starts to look calculated, every gesture rehearsed. Olivia was still standing with Daniel, closer now, more comfortable. Like the space around them had quietly shifted to exclude me entirely, and I watched for a moment without approaching, not out of hesitation, but because distance gives you clarity that proximity never will. There was a time when I would have walked straight into that circle, forced myself into the conversation, tried to reclaim something that was slipping away, but that version of me had already ended earlier that night, somewhere between her laughter and his question. Instead, I moved toward the bar, ordered another drink I did not intend to finish, and let my eyes track the room the way I used to years ago, not as a guest, but as someone responsible for what happened inside it. It had been a long time since I allowed myself to think that way, since I stepped back and let others take the visible roles, make the speeches, carry the titles, and for a while, it worked. It gave me space, freedom, distance from the constant noise of expectations, but power does not disappear just because you stop announcing it. It waits, it observes. And when necessary, it reminds people exactly where it sits. My phone buzzed. Again, another quiet update, a layer beneath the surface shifting slightly, approvals moving through channels that only a handful of people even knew existed, and I watched the confirmation appear with a calm that would have looked like indifference to anyone else. But it was not indifference, it was alignment, everything moving exactly as it should. Across the room, Daniel said something that made Olivia tilt her head back and laugh again. And this time, I noticed the way others around them responded, the subtle shifts in posture, the small glances, the unspoken hierarchy that placed him at the center and me somewhere outside the frame, and it almost impressed me how quickly perception can redefine reality when no one challenges it. I took a slow breath, letting the noise fade just enough to hear my own thoughts clearly, and I realized something that felt almost detached, almost analytical. This was not just about disrespect, it was about narrative, about the story people choose to believe because it is easier than questioning what they see, and Olivia had chosen hers completely, fully, without hesitation. I set the glass down untouched, straightened slightly, and began walking back toward them, not with urgency, not with emotion, but with purpose, because there is a moment in every situation like this where observation ends and action begins, and I could feel that moment approaching, not explosive, not dramatic, but precise, controlled, inevitable, the kind of shift that does not announce itself until it is already too late to stop it. And as I closed the distance between us, I knew one thing with absolute certainty: whatever happened next was not going to be a reaction. It was going to be a decision. I stopped just short of their circle, close enough to hear, far enough to remain unnoticed for one more second, and that second mattered because it gave me the last piece I needed. "He does not even understand half of what goes on here," Olivia said, her voice light, almost amused, and Daniel nodded like it was obvious, like it was already agreed upon truth, and something about the ease of that exchange confirmed what I had been sensing all night. This was no longer assumption, this was belief. Solid, unchallenged, and deeply wrong. I stepped forward then, not interrupting, not forcing attention, just entering the space as if I had always belonged there, and for a brief moment, Olivia glanced at me, her expression shifting just slightly, not guilt, not concern, just mild surprise, like I had returned to a conversation I was never really part of. "Everything all right?" she asked, polite, distant, the kind of question you ask out of habit, not care, and I nodded once, calm, steady. Because the answer no longer mattered. Daniel gave a small smile, the kind that carried just enough edge to remind me of my place, and I returned it without resistance, because resistance would have been a reaction, and I was done reacting. Instead, I let the silence stretch for half a breath longer than comfortable, then shifted my attention past them, toward the far end of the room where a few senior executives stood near a glass wall overlooking the city, their posture different, quieter. Aware of something others were not yet noticing, my phone vibrated once more in my pocket, a subtle signal, the kind only I understood, and I did not need to check it to know what it meant. Everything was now in motion. Olivia started to say something else, something casual, something that would have kept the moment exactly where she wanted it, controlled, predictable, safe. But I spoke first, not loudly, not sharply, just enough to redirect the air around us. "You might want to stay for what happens next," I said, my voice even, almost neutral, and for the first time that night, Daniel's expression shifted, just slightly, because confidence without explanation is easy to dismiss, but certainty without emotion is not, and as the room began to quiet in ways most people would not notice yet, I realized something simple. They still thought this was their stage. They just did not know the script had already changed. The shift started quietly, the kind most people miss because they are too busy listening to themselves, a subtle change in tone as conversations softened, as attention redirected without anyone announcing it, and across the room, one of the senior executives straightened, glancing toward the entrance like he had just received confirmation of something only a few were expecting. I watched it unfold without moving, without needing to check my phone again, because timing like this does not require repetition, it requires precision, and everything had already aligned. Daniel followed my gaze, just for a second, curiosity replacing that easy confidence he had been carrying all night, and Olivia noticed it too, her expression tightening almost imperceptibly, like something in the atmosphere no longer matched the version of the evening she believed she was controlling. "What is going on?" she asked, quieter now, less certain, and I turned my attention back to her, not to explain, not to reassure, just to observe the moment as it began to shift under her feet. Footsteps approached from behind us, measured, deliberate, and the kind that command attention without asking for it, and within seconds, the low hum of the room dropped another level as people began to notice who was moving through the space and why. One of the executives stopped just short of our group, his eyes meeting mine first, not Olivia's, not Daniel's, and that alone was enough to fracture the illusion they had been standing on. "We are ready," he said simply, no introduction, no clarification, because none was needed, and for the first time that night, silence settled fully around us, not awkward, not confused, but expectant, like the room itself was waiting for something it did not yet understand. Olivia looked between us, the question in her eyes no longer hidden, no longer controlled, and Daniel's posture shifted, just slightly, the first crack in the confidence he had worn so easily minutes ago. I adjusted my sleeve, calm as ever, and stepped forward, not into the spotlight, but into the position that had always been mine, whether they recognized it or not, and as I did, I realized something with absolute clarity. This was no longer about proving anything, this was about revealing what had been there all along. The room did not erupt, it did not gasp or freeze the way people imagine moments like this should, instead it shifted, like a current changing direction beneath the surface, subtle but undeniable, and I stepped forward alongside the executive without looking back at Olivia or Daniel because their reactions no longer mattered in the way they once did. The screens along the far wall flickered to life, not with celebration, but with information, clean layouts, financial dashboards, internal structures that only a handful of people in that building had ever seen, and certainly not in this setting, and I could feel the attention of the room lock into place, not on the data itself, but on who had the authority to bring it into view. I stopped near the center, not elevated, not announced, just present, and that was enough, because recognition does not always need introduction, sometimes it just needs confirmation. As of tonight, the executive began, his voice steady, professional. We are initiating a full internal review under direct authorization. And he paused, just long enough for the weight of that statement to settle, before adding, approved at the highest level. And then his gaze shifted, not dramatically, just enough, toward me. It was a small movement, almost invisible, but in a room like this, those details matter more than words, and I watched as understanding began to spread, slow at first, then faster, as people connected what they were seeing to what they thought they knew. Behind me, I could hear Olivia's breath catch slightly, not loud, not dramatic, just enough to signal the moment her version of reality started to crack. And Daniel did not speak at all this time, his silence heavier than any comment he had made earlier. I turned slightly, finally allowing my eyes to meet theirs again, not with anger, not with satisfaction, just with calm certainty, the kind that does not need to explain itself, and in that moment, the distance between who they thought I was and who I actually was collapsed completely, leaving only one truth standing in its place. No one spoke at first, not because they did not want to, but because they did not know how to, and that silence carried more weight than anything that had been said all night. The screens continued to update behind me, lines of data unfolding with quiet precision, each detail reinforcing what had already become undeniable. This was not a presentation, not a suggestion, it was authority in motion. I took a slow step forward. Just enough to center myself in the room, and for the first time, I did not blend into the background. I did not stand half a step behind anyone. I simply stood where I had always belonged, and that alone shifted everything. This review is not optional, I said, my voice even, controlled, the kind that does not rise because it does not need to. And it is not temporary. And I let that settle, watching as understanding deepened across the faces around me, some recognizing the implication immediately, others catching up seconds later. Olivia stared at me now, no longer confused in a casual way, but searching, like she was trying to reconcile two completely different versions of the same person and failing to make them fit, and Daniel, for the first time, looked like he was measuring his words before speaking, but nothing came, because there was nothing left to challenge. I turned slightly, acknowledging the executive beside me with a small nod, a confirmation more than a request, and he responded instantly, as if the entire evening had been waiting for that single signal. Effective immediately, he said, addressing the room, but his tone carried a new layer now, one shaped by alignment rather than protocol. All reporting lines will be reviewed under direct oversight. And again, that subtle shift of attention returned to me, no longer discreet, no longer avoidable. I let my gaze move back to Olivia, holding it just long enough for the truth to fully register, not as a shock, but as a realization she could not step away from, and in that moment, there was no anger in me, no satisfaction, just clarity, because the difference between perception and reality had finally been removed, and what remained was something far simpler, far colder, and far more permanent than anything she had believed just hours ago. The room did not return to normal, not after that, because once a truth like this surfaces, it does not fade back into the background. It reshapes everything around it. Conversation stopped pretending, smiles lost their polish, and the subtle hierarchy that had once been invisible now stood exposed in plain sight. People who had been laughing minutes ago were now watching carefully, measuring every word, every reaction. And the shift in their posture said more than anything else. Respect had moved, and it had not moved toward Olivia or Daniel. I watched as Daniel finally stepped back half a pace, not dramatic, not obvious, but enough to show the weight of what was happening had reached him, and his earlier confidence was gone, replaced by something quieter, something uncertain. Olivia did not move at all, her eyes fixed on me, searching for something familiar, something she could still control. But there was nothing left for her to anchor to, because the version of me she understood no longer existed in this space. The executive beside me continued outlining the process, calm, structured, irreversible, each sentence reinforcing the same reality. This was not a moment, This was a shift in power that would carry forward long after tonight ended. I took a slow breath, letting the silence between words stretch just enough to let it all settle. And then I spoke again, not to the room this time, but to her, my voice quiet enough that only she could fully hear it. You built your certainty on something incomplete. And I held her gaze for a second longer, not to accuse, not to argue, just to let the meaning land where it needed to. Her expression changed then, not dramatically, but enough, the confidence gone, replaced by the first real understanding of what had actually been standing in front of her all along. I straightened slightly. Not as a gesture of dominance, but as a return to alignment. And as the room continued to shift around us, I realized something final. This was never about taking anything from them. It was about revealing what they had already lost the moment they chose to believe the wrong story. I did not stay to watch the rest unfold, not because I needed distance, but because my part in it was already complete, and some endings do not require an audience to be real. The room continued behind me, quieter now, heavier, every conversation shaped by what had just been revealed, but I walked past it without hesitation, through the same doors where I had entered earlier that night as someone they barely noticed, and now left as someone they would not forget. The hallway felt different on the way out, not brighter, not darker, just clearer, like the noise had finally been stripped away, leaving only what mattered. I could still feel Olivia's gaze on my back, not calling out, not stopping me, just watching, trying to understand something that no longer belonged to her, and for a brief second, I considered turning around, not to explain, not to comfort, but to acknowledge what had been lost, but I did not. Because some realizations need silence more than words. Outside, the night air was cool, steady, untouched by everything that had just shifted inside, and I paused at the top of the steps, looking out over the city lights stretching for miles, each one part of a system most people never see, never question, just like the structures I had built and maintained without ever needing recognition. People think power is about control over others, about dominance, visibility, but it is not. It is about knowing when to step forward and when to walk away without looking back, and tonight, I had done both. I adjusted my jacket, not out of habit this time, but as a final motion, a quiet signal to myself that the chapter had closed exactly as it needed to, no noise, no chaos, just truth revealed and consequences set in motion, somewhere behind those walls. Olivia was still standing in a version of the night that no longer existed, trying to reconcile the man she thought she knew with the one who had just walked away, and that distance between those two realities would be something she carried long after this moment faded for everyone else. I took one last breath, steady and unhurried, then stepped forward into the night, leaving everything that no longer aligned exactly where it belonged, behind me, untouched, unresolved for them, but completely finished for me.